Hi, everyone. I'm Flynn.
I'm Gianni.
I'm Luke.
And this is Chatting Cinema. And we figured that with Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker, the latest Star Wars film coming out pretty soon, that we would do a retrospective on all 8 previous main saga Skywalker films. So we're going chronologically, and today we're going to start with The Phantom Menace.
Woo!
Everyone's favorite, right? The best one.
Right,
Yes.
correct.
Luke, you're actually a pretty big fan, right?
I am. Well, because, all right, fun fact, I'm named after Luke Skywalker, 1. So that's just like the beginning of my life. I was meant to love Star Wars and make movies. But 2, so my brother wanted to see Phantom Menace in theaters so many times in 1999, me as a 2-year-old, that I feel like in my head, I just am happy when I'm watching Phantom Menace. I don't know what it is. It's just like, it reminds me, like, I had all the action figures. I had the entire toy line, like, as a kid, loved it so much. And, like, we had the VHS tape and we wore it out.
Right.
Like, it was great. And, like, that has carried into my adult life, unlike most Star Wars fans,
Yeah.
where I'm like, I still love this movie.
Right, and I feel like that's something with the prequels in general and our generation, something about growing up with them and coming at them from an innocent perspective.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because they're fun movies.
Yeah,
and,
they are.
And when you get into it, like technical things like dialogue and CGI and stuff,
Then you're kind of tearing it apart.
It falls apart.
Yeah.
But I feel like we don't really do that as much. Because we grew up on them, and it was the Star Wars from our childhood.
Yeah.
And like you said, I had every action figure, every ship I could get.
I know. The Lego sets, too.
The Lego games.
The Lego
games.
I remember playing my Game Boy, and I would play the Lego like prequel games. Oh, they were so great.
Yeah,
So hard to beat Grievous.
losing the little lightsabers for my action figures.
That
and
was
then-
the worst.
So Phantom Menace came out in 1999.
Were you guys alive yet?
I was born that year.
Okay, you were. I just
Yeah.
forget how much older I
Yeah.
am than you guys.
I should probably say I didn't actually see Phantom Menace until I was maybe 5 years old.
Wow,
That may
okay.
be the earliest memory I have of it. And
Yeah.
like you were saying, we don't really pick up on the bad dialogue, things like that when we're at a young age. 'Cause to me, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, they were like the best movies ever.
Right.
Yeah.
At that
Yeah.
age,
It was so exciting when
They
one
are,
of them came
yeah.
out. Yeah.
They're bright, they're colorful, they're explosive, they're everything a kid wants.
Yeah.
And Star Wars is a franchise made with children in mind, to appeal to them, and so I think that there's value in that, in what Lucas created with these. So this was the first Star Wars movie to come out since 1983.
It's a big gap.
It is a big gap, and this process of making the prequels is interesting because it was a little different. George Lucas was always the sort of the godfather behind Star Wars and had a lot of the big concepts and ideas.
Because he didn't direct 4, 5, or 6.
He
Right.
directed 4, and that's it.
Or
Yeah.
he directed
Yeah.
4, yeah.
So it was always more of a made by committee Star Wars, with Lucas as a driving creative
He was always
force.
there
Right.
to make sure it was still Star Wars.
But then you have guys like Irvin Kershner directed Empire,
Mm-hmm.
or Lawrence Kasdan, writing the scripts. But with the prequels, he sort of took on this massive role of, I'm going to do it all. It's my vision. And by that time, Star Wars is the biggest thing in the world. It exploded. Everybody loves it. So, anybody working on those films with Lucas isn't going to necessarily challenge him on anything.
Sure. And he was so sure of himself too, right? I
Right.
mean, this was the first movie he directed after, that 22-year break
Yeah.
between directing Phantom Menace and A New Hope.
Yeah.
And he comes along and he's thinking, okay, the CGI, the special effects are all up to date. I can do this movie. And he had a lot of yes people in the room,
Yes.
right? Is that what
Yeah.
you're getting at?
Yeah. And, it always seemed like, if you look at interviews with Lucas and even people like Mark Hamill, this always seemed like it was going to happen, these extra movies, the prequels and getting into the Clone Wars and how everything happened. It always seemed like something that Lucas wanted to do. So it is cool that he got to do it. So Phantom Menace is, we find the galaxy on the brink of civil war.
Gotta love some space politics.
Right, gotta love some space politics. And that's another interesting thing about the prequels, and you really feel it in this movie, where Star Wars has always been political and it's always been allegorical and things like that. But in the original trilogy, it feels much more like subtext, like something we glean on our own and sort of take from it what we understand. It's not subtle in that it's about anti-fascism or anything like that, but this prequel trilogy sort of gets into minutia, and I think that that's one of the things that really bogs it down, because George Lucas will be the first person to tell you that he struggles writing dialogue. When you want to deal with these heavy concepts,
and you have weak dialogue
and you have weak
carrying them
dialogue,
out, it's rough.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, because, like, don't get me wrong, like, I am a big fan of this movie, but the thing I will not defend is those long scenes in the Senate room where it's just, like, swooping, like, little carrying ships holding a bunch of senators. I'm just, like, as, like, a 5-year-old, I'm like, where's Qui-Gon Jinn?
Yeah.
Right.
Where's Darth Maul? Like,
Yeah.
that's what I'm here for.
Where are the lightsabers?
Yes.
What are we doing
why,
here?
Why are they talking about things I don't get?
Right.
And even as an adult now, I'm just like, what are they even saying?
Exactly. Yeah. It's
3 kind of got it to the point where, like, the politics were starting to make more sense.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
like
I
1
agree.
and 2 were just like, what are they even trying to say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, different planets and trade federations and Senate. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's really,
It's
really
a lot.
dense.
Yeah.
So some of the more fun sequences in this movie that everybody loves have nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
We have the pod racing.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we have, obviously, I think that everybody's favorite scene in this movie, for the most part, is the final lightsaber battle.
I mean, the music in that scene
Right.
alone is probably the most iconic non-Force theme / Skywalker theme song out of
Yeah.
Star Wars.
Duel
So,
of the Fates by
Yes.
John Williams. Great.
shout out to John Williams.
Yeah.
And that's sort of when it feels like Star Wars, like
Yeah.
this big epic battle. The chorus is going.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the thing I loved about that scene was how they crossed it between Jar Jar and the Gungans on the battlefield, Anakin in space, like truly showing how he is a great
Right.
pilot at 8 years old or 10
Yeah.
years old, whatever he is.
The
And
chosen
then
one.
and then back
Yeah.
and forth between then the lightsaber fight and then like the palace and Padme, like that was like really well done. I
Yes.
always thought like
Yeah,
whoa,
I
like taking
agree.
all of those actions, because like that's what war is. War is not
Right.
fought in one spot.
Right.
Sure.
And this is like the first big battle of it. But I did want to go back because I thought the movie opened on such a strong note where we don't know Qui-Gon Jinn and we know Obi-Wan, but we didn't know we only knew old Ben version.
Right. We
Right.
didn't know him in his prime.
Exactly.
Sure.
So it opens up on them, and there was a little bit of politics, but then we got lightsabers.
Mm.
So I just thought that opening scene was such a cool introduction to Qui-Gon, because that you really needed to introduce that character, because you needed to be like, all right, this is the guy who taught Obi-Wan everything he knew, and that's why Obi-Wan was so wise. And we also see a young Obi-Wan who doesn't know everything.
Right.
He is imperfect. And I thought that was awesome. Like, just Ewan McGregor really sold
Yes.
the prequel trilogy.
Yes.
Like, the
Right.
fact that he grew into the character we all loved in episode 4, and then now, I mean, everybody talks about him. Disney knows and are
Right.
making the show with him
Right.
because they still can. Like, why not?
Yeah, I mean, from the moment Disney purchased Star Wars, it sort of felt like people were wondering, when is Ewan going to be back as Obi-Wan?
He still looks like he could play Obi-Wan right
Right.
after episode
Yeah.
3. Just
Yes.
regrow the beard.
Yeah, and I think that's the one sort of universally praised thing about the prequels across the board is Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan. He's so good, and any sort of like dialogue mishaps or anything, he sort of just elevates to the point where you don't even notice because
Yeah.
he's so good.
His story was just really compelling, too. So,
Yes.
Definitely, and big shoes to fill from Alec Guinness too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there are interviews where he was really afraid to take on that role, and he did, and it was well received.
Thank goodness he did.
Yeah.
I
'Cause
would
who knows
venture
they
to
would've
say,
found.
Yeah.
I would venture to say that that's probably one of the saving graces of the prequel trilogy is the
Yeah.
characters. I
Yes.
think we get
Yeah.
attached to Obi-Wan, we get attached to Padme
And
Amidala,
Anakin, too.
and
I mean,
Anakin.
He didn't
I-
have the best dialogue, but I still was attached.
I am a fan of Anakin. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I am too. I mean, that's the other thing is, like, if you think about it, they had 3 beloved movies already out, and then they're bringing in a movie where it's younger versions of the Emperor, of
Yes.
Darth Vader, of Obi-Wan, and you're like, where's our heroes, Luke, Leia, and Han,
Right.
and Chewie, and like the only heroes that we see consistently are C-3PO and R2D2.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, that was really big shoes to fill, and also kind of creating like it always blew my mind how in episode 4 they talked about the Clone Wars.
Yes.
And
yeah.
in 1977, they said the words "the Clone Wars," and the Clone Wars didn't start until 1999,
Right.
technically 2002.
Yes, yeah.
You know, like that, I was just amazed by as a kid.
Yeah, really fascinating. Really, and that's such a good. Star Wars has such great world building. And sometimes they've done this to great effect. Sometimes it's sort of fallen apart where something's set up and you just feel everything in Star Wars is so lived in and so real. And so you always feel like you can go out and explore that deeper. And so sometimes you have like the expanded universe novels, and a lot of them really aren't very good. But they have that footing from the world that George created, where it just feels like anybody in a cantina, anybody on a battlefield, you feel like you can go to that person and learn their story, and it might be pretty interesting.
And it would fit in, yeah.
Sure. And getting back to that anticipation of Phantom Menace, people were excited to return to places like Tatooine, you know, and see what it was like way back when. And I think that's a really compelling thing.
Which this movie, we actually got to see Tatooine.
Exactly.
And it wasn't like the goal was just to get out right away. Like, we saw it, and we saw Jabba doing his thing, being the boss of the planet. Like, and I mean, like you said, the pod racing scene was awesome.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I love that.
Tatooine is really interesting.
I feel like it's the glue that held the first 6 movies together. Because they always ended up back on Tatooine for something. Like, they had to go find a chosen one twice on Tatooine.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and everything it all feels grimy and a little sleazy, and that's how Tatooine is presented to us.
And then our heroes, Luke and Anakin, are like raised by that,
right?
Are in it, and that's what always made them so interesting.
Yeah, yeah, very good. So Phantom Menace, when it first came out, wasn't really the more hated movie it became.
It definitely became it. Yeah.
I think that.
Well, the internet definitely played a part in that.
It was
the memes.
Yeah, a lot of it was the internet. I mean, because critics didn't really know, like, how should I feel about this? It was really a different blockbuster.
Well, they praised the effects. They praised the effects, the
exactly.
score.
Yeah, for the time, it was fantastic effects-wise.
And they knocked things like the dialogue and like some of the performances. So,
although one thing I never understood as a Star Wars fan was, like, you're not going in to see like a groundbreaking like cinematic masterpiece. You just want a good story,
right?
And each one of them pretty much tells a good story. So like from a Star Wars fan's point of view, there's really no Star Wars movie I'm truly unhappy with.
Yeah.
Like, and critics are just like, oh, well, the dialogue is weak. Well, I don't go to Star Wars to see the greatest written dialogue.
Right.
Like, of course, I don't want it to be bad, but like, I feel like they're always so extra harsh when a Star Wars movie comes out.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting. I mean, we can, get into it with any of the Star Wars movies as we continue through these retrospectives, but I think that a lot of people, not that, I don't absolutely adore every movie in the original trilogy, because I do. I hold them in such high regards. But I think that a lot of people sort of revere them so much that they don't go back and understand, like, those movies are incredibly silly, and some of the dialogue is really goofy, and it's super cheesy and campy, and that is by design. That's what Star Wars is.
It worked because it appealed to so many audiences,
right?
Where there was a real enough story for older fans, because the older fans that started with the original trilogy still stuck around, and then the people who grew up with them were so mad about the prequels saying all these things, but like you said, they're pretty much doing the same thing, just different time periods. And like, I've had this experience so many times where I try to show somebody Star Wars and I show them episode 4 and they get bored or fall asleep because it is a very slow paced movie. Meanwhile, you show them 1, 2, or 3, and even though 4 is better, they get more excited and are more into it because it's a newer movie and it's different pacing. And like, that's where 1, I was like, okay, 1 brought Star Wars back. Like, without 1, you'd have nothing after it. Like, you wouldn't have your beloved Clone Wars show. You wouldn't have, which is amazing. I'm not knocking it, but there's people who are like, episode 1 sucks. Like, there's even the machete order where they don't even acknowledge episode 1. I'm like, all right, like, it's real, guys. Like, it's real. It happened. Like, it's not the best movie, but I love it.
And there's something to say for that, because George Lucas had a vision, right, for these movies. And then, like you were saying earlier, Flynn, that he can't really write dialogue well. And he's the first person to admit that. But if you peel back the layers of any one of the prequel trilogy, like there are movies there. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah.
And there are
100%.
stories there
Yeah.
to be told.
It's not as far off as people
everyone
would
makes
like you
it
to believe.
Exactly. Yep.
From being this sort of tour de force. And
Yeah. And like the one thing I was always like so interested by in episode 1 was that Qui-Gon was just such a dynamic, interesting character, and he has since become such a huge, important character
Yeah.
within the grand scale of Star Wars because he's the one who figured out how to do Force ghosts.
Right.
And like without that, I mean, that was kind of utilized a lot in 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and even in 7 and 8, they've used it like without Qui-Gon. And like Qui-Gon is like a direct influence to Obi-Wan, who influenced Anakin, who influenced Luke. Like you take
Exactly.
away Qui-Gon, and it's like everything would be so different. And Liam Neeson delivered a fantastic
Yes.
performance too.
Yeah, he's great. And I don't want to blame Qui-Gon for the Empire, Darth Vader, but I mean Qui-Gon sort of sets this to like yes, gets it going and
But imagine if he was there to train Anakin, it might
Right.
have went different,
Right,
you
yeah.
know. And it's like then you blame Obi-Wan, but you can't, you
Yeah.
know. But yeah, I just always loved his character so much,
Yeah.
and Darth Maul too. Another character who since has become so important in the grand scale of Star Wars. And like I'm like that's their introductions. Like
Right.
it was such a great way to learn who these characters are.
Yeah.
And like after Darth Vader being like that big ominous villain for 3 movies, like Darth Maul had huge shoes to fill
Definitely.
Absolutely.
to be the next like impending villain, and they could have went with another character that like had the quirk like the breathing, but no, they went with a mute.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, like that's interesting.
Yeah.
Like I like that a lot. And then the look was so distinct. Like I loved everything about Darth Maul. He's
Yeah.
probably my favorite villain from Star Wars.
Yeah, very different, very imposing.
And the dual lightsaber,
yeah, so
the
cool.
game changer.
Yeah.
Game changer.
So, and that plays into not watching trailers because they showed that in the trailer. But if that's your first experience with it in Phantom Menace, if you get to the Duel of the Fates and you're wondering why this guy's lightsaber has such a long hill,
Oops, I just punched my mic.
and then
I'm
you know,
excited.
yeah, goes into a double blade, which is something new, and the prequels introduce a lot of new things that got built upon by other people and really fleshed it out by things that people quote unquote like the Clone Wars.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, Darth Maul's arc in Clone Wars, when you find out he's not dead and he's driven by this revenge.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoilers for Clone Wars cartoon. And he has this revenge arc against Obi-Wan.
Oh my God.
It's so interesting.
Love
and
that arc.
That doesn't exist. That
Yeah.
doesn't exist without.
Yeah. And spoiler
Phantom
alert,
Menace.
Rebels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, spoiler alert too, Solo.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
He comes in at the
That's
end
what
of
I
Solo.
mean. He's
Yeah.
so important. I've honestly been waiting for Liam Neeson to show up again.
Yeah.
Like he did.
He
voiced-
returned for the Clone Wars,
He
right?
did, but
He
that
did.
was only ghost form. I
Yeah.
want me some Qui-Gon Jinn Solo movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, like just
Anything's
him.
possible with Disney.
It really
and
is.
the mouse.
Yeah,
And who knows?
the
this
money
is
of the mouse.
Yeah.
This isn't really a space where we're speculating about Episode 9, but Force Ghost wise, you never know.
He'd be a great Force Ghost
Yeah.
to show up and be like, "Yo, Rey,
Yeah.
you need to learn how to be a Jedi already."
Right. And I think it would be a fun surprise. For
Yeah.
people.
So,
Yeah.
so some final thoughts on Phantom Menace from me. I saw the movie, obviously, like I said, when I was a little younger, and I really liked it when I saw it when I was about 5 years old,
Yeah.
and kind of growing up with that prequel trilogy. I do think it is the weakest of the prequel trilogy, but I do think that 1, 2, and 3 really kind of get better as they go.
Yeah.
I think Attack of the Clones is better than Phantom Menace, and same thing for Revenge of the Sith. I think it's better than Attack of the Clones. But I liked what Phantom Menace set up. Like you guys said earlier, and like I said too, I think the characters are really the saving grace of these 3 films. And I think, like I said, Lucas really had something there. And maybe if he had someone else writing the scripts with him or some people in the room to challenge him on some of his ideas, I think we could have had some significantly better films. But as far as Phantom Menace goes, I like it today, and I have a lot of respect for it.
Yeah. I mean, my final thoughts, because, I just got to get it out there. Everybody knows now that I'm a gigantic fan of this movie. I've watched it so many times. Like, I watched it 2 days ago without knowing we were recording this. But I even watched it on the plane going to California. There was a bunch of movies I hadn't seen. I was like, I'll watch Phantom Menace again. Like, why not? But I just think that this movie does such a great job of introducing fans what Star Wars is all about. It may not be the best, but it hits home everything Star Wars wants you to know with interesting characters like you've brought up, and then great visual effects for the time. I mean, 1999 was like a pivotal time for movies in general, with like computer generated effects just starting. I mean, like Pixar started in 95 with their films. Like it was a really changing point, as opposed to Star Wars does amazing practical effects to this day, but without Phantom Menace being the first movie to utilize those effects, it's like a big deal for Star Wars. And then for me, it's almost like, one, I'm just biased. Two, I wasn't as big a fan of as one, but then three, it's like it brings it home. Like this is actually a good movie. Like I think so.
Yeah. I think the prequels are really interesting, and I think that everybody sort of has different thoughts on which movie is their favorite. I see a lot of Attack of the Clones is the worst. I see a lot of Phantom Menace is the worst. I think that consensus-wise, people tend to hold Revenge of the Sith sort of
as the best
highest
of the three, yeah. Although I always thought, like, why focus on which one you hate the most?
Right.
You know, like, I mean, as much as I don't like episode 2, then I just don't talk about episode 2 as much, you know?
Exactly.
Because, like, there's things I love about 1 and 3 that I always bring up. And I'm just like, I'll leave 2 alone. Like, the end fight was dope.
Yeah. And like you were saying earlier, Luke, about the machete order, like, people want to pretend like this one didn't happen.
But it so important.
Yeah, and it has some really pivotal things in it. So, for what it is, it's still a fun watch. And I think that, like you said, if you're introducing people to Star Wars, there is some real value in going chronologically and watching from Phantom Menace. So yeah, I have some similar ideas about the movie itself as you do, Gianni. I would probably rank it at the bottom of mine, but that's not a sign of disrespect towards it or anything.
I mean, I think that's the thing is no matter how we talk about a Star Wars movie, we all love it.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
Sure.
It's Star Wars. I mean, like, and we're only going to get so many because Disney's probably only going to produce like 50 more movies.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Well, we don't even know what Disney's going to do.
Yeah.
As long as they make money, they'll keep making them. But
Yeah.
I just think it's important to find the positives within each movie because each one brings something to the table, and Phantom Menace is definitely the most hated.
Right.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
Except maybe episode 8 now.
Yeah.
Because I feel like
See,
it's such a
people-
split.
Depending on, what
Who you
communities,
talk to.
Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, I just love me some Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul.
Yeah, so I think that's going to wrap up our Phantom Menace episode. We're going to keep doing these from Attack of the Clones up until The Last Jedi, leading up to Rise of Skywalker. So keep listening if you like Star Wars, want to hear about Star Wars. So we'll see you next time.